Okay, good morning. We're on our last shir for the Sif. When paid out of a test, read the Ramah. The Ramah says the Mechaber had said different cases when it's also to eat a vegetable because there are bugs in it. The Ramah says v'davka meichel di'ef shalasananoi u'lahosim mehem hatulan. Or the cases that we were just described that they're also to eat them is assuming you can't filter the vegetable afterwards to get the bugs out. Since you know that there are bugs in there and you can't get them out, so you're stopped. So it does. If you can sieve them or filter them, you get out the bugs that you can, and the rest of it is mutter. Okay? So don't worry about the hashar, the ones you can't get out. The Rambam says if you can filter it, you can get it out. So there's a little question. Okay? The Rambam said if you can't filter it, you can't get them out, then you can't eat it. If you can't eat it. So the question is, well, why not? If you can't get them out, then they're mixed together. It's a taruvas, and then the whole thing is mutter. There's no.
You have a correlate too.
So what's the problem? The bugs. If the bug can't get out, so the bug if you can't get it out, then it's mixed together. It's gone. It's lost. So the answer is. The simple answer is. There are more than one answer, but the simple answer is that the reason why it can't be bottled is because it's a barrier. Were it to have been, let's say, half of a bug, it would have been okay. But since we're assuming that there's a whole bug in this, it's a barrier. Okay, so I don't know for sure, but to my knowledge, it's the hint, maybe the only hint in the siman that there's such a thing that a bug is also because it's a barrier. Now, lots of the siman is based on that. Lots of situations that we talk about are only an issur if you think about it because they're a barrier. But the Ramah is hinting at that. He's not using. I don't see in the whole siman the word barrier. Okay, I may have missed it, but I don't see it. And here it's a hint at the fact that because it's a barrier, it's an assumption that that's a problem. In fact, in Siman Kuf, which is the siman about barriers and certain other things that can't be bottled, it's right there that Torahim are barriers and can't be bottled. As an example of one of the things that could be a barrier, it's in those halachos. I'm just saying that in this siman, I don't see it in this siman spoken out clearly. It's an assumption. We all know work with that. It's just an assumption. I'm just saying that here the Ramah is hinting at it. I don't see it elsewhere being spoken out clearly. So, we're covered that the Ramah is hinting at that over there. I just wanted to talk about, we've heard about it more recently again, the Aruch HaShulchan at the end of Siman Kuf, again, it's a siman about barriers, says he wants to be Limud Zechus on people who are lax about Hilchos Tamaim. Okay, and what he says is the people who just look casually at the food, and if they see that there's no bugs in it, then they eat it. Okay, and he says, of course, there are people who are medactic, who are more careful. He says, but lots of people are just giving it a glance, they see nothing, and they go ahead and eat it. So he wants to be Limud Zechus, and we're talking about here because all the things that he says, all of the points, he has 3 points why he wants to say that it's okay. His 3 parts of his Limud Zechus are all related to the fact that it's being a barrier. Okay, each one, they're all related to that fact that it's a barrier. And his 3 points are like this. First of all, there are those who hold that even though we say that a barrier can't be bottled, that means it can't be bottled b'shishim, but it could be bottled in 960. Okay, it's such a shita that when we say barrier can't be bottled, we say barrier loy b'teila in shishim, but if you have much more than that in 960, then it can't be bottled. Okay? So that's the reason to think that it's not true. That's the reason to think that it's not true. But there is such a shita that says that it can be bottled in 960.
What's 960?
Is it 16 times 60 or I don't remember what the Kashrus is. I don't know what the Kashrus is. Why it's bottled. Okay.
So
960.
So in Cain, let me finish it.
You should say, but
let me finish the thought. Let me finish the thought. So therefore, of course, the insects usually in our vegetables are less than 1/960th. Okay, and therefore they would be bottled. Yes. What do you want to say?
So usually when dealing with Tom, it's bottled shishim.
Right.
Other things usually it's balanced. Usually so it's 960.
So that's what he said. When we say a feel be'elf like bottle is lafuke such a thing.
Right.
Okay, and there's it's
not totally in town.
Such a shita that says like that. Okay, next. The second is there's a Mishnah Yaakov who says that the reason why berry is not bottled is because it has a chashivas to it. It has certain chashivas to it. So he says that's only true if you have an insect that at least has some reasonable amount of size to it. So we're looking at these really, really tiny ones that are so mamish, infinitesimally small, then you can't say that has, it's so small even that it's lost in the vegetable. You don't even see it. It's like so hard to see. He says those are not considered that can't possibly be considered to be so prominent that we would consider it to be a barrier.
And
not
Chaber says in quote that.
So he would say that that's only talking about larger bugs, right? Larger bugs. He says the mamish, the really tiny ones that are mamish, like so impossible to
Worm or
see.
something like
Okay,
that.
that's what he wants to say they're not barriers. That's a second shita. Third is, again, in each one of these, and we're going to talk about this in detail in a second, each one of these are shitas that are rejected. These are not, we don't pass like any of these things. But he wants to be Muhammad Zechus to say that Samach on these things. And the last is, the Mechaber says at the end of Siman Kuf Dalet, he talks about foods that are disgusting to people, and he's talking about what that should be considered Nesan Tam Lafgam. He's not talking about what we're talking about. That it's Nesan Tam Lafgam, meaning that it can be Batal B'Roiv, it doesn't eat Shishim. And so he says, if insects, those are the things that are talked about there, are so disgusting to people find them disgusting, in Cain, they can be barriers. Because barrier means that it's a hush of a thing. How can he say that it's chosher when it's something that everybody finds to be?
They can't be barriers, so he says in those cases the barriers can be bottled.
Or
Or that means the same thing. I'm saying nothing.
You don't realize that you are saying two different stuff. And with Indian, the din of bittul, the bittul of a barrier wouldn't apply in this case because a barrier not being bottled is because it has such chashivas, like in the second point he said, it could have such chashivas. How can he say it has chashivas when I find it disgusting? So
this barrier is a barrier, but this kind of barrier is bottled.
This correct. That's
And
correct.
the second thing you said that it's
The second was
it's not kosher. It's not a barrier.
because it's so tiny.
And then was not a barrier. It's a barrier, but it can be bottled.
Second, it's a barrier that can be bottled.
Very cool.
Also.
Okay, so these are his three reasons. Again, I told you, every one of them is not the din. We don't pass like any of these, but he wants to say that that's the Limud Zechus as to why people do it. Okay, now
So all these things rely on the fact that it's a terus.
yes, we're coming to that. Very good point. We're coming to that. So the reasons to disagree, if I can use that word, on what the Aruch HaShulchan says, I'm going to break up into two parts. First, people who argue on his specific points, okay, and then general arguments that they had on him. Okay, first we're going to do the specifics. The specifics to what he has to say. First is the first point that he said that it's bottled in 960. Okay, a few sifim before that in the Aruch HaShulchan, in that same siman, he brings the shita and he says it's not the den. Okay, we don't pass like that. He says there is such a shita. It's true there is such a shita. He says we don't pass like it. So he says, well, when he's talking about it now, he says, it's true that we don't pass like that. But he says, the Gemara says something to say, Kedaihu, somebody, l'smach la b'shas hatchak, and therefore it's a shas hatchak, we can be samach on that shita. Okay? We're going to get back to that in a second, to that point over there. But, so one argument is, the Aruch HaShulchan himself says, he says, it's not the din. We don't pass on that bottle 960. So he said, no, over here it's a shas hatchak, you can be samach on that das. Okay, the last two parts of what the Aruch HaShulchan said is that a barrier's not being able to be bottled has something to do with it being a davar choshev. Okay, those are both based on that. So now he wants to argue it's not choshev because it's tiny, or it's not choshev because it's disgusting. He says, well, the problem is that that's not the reason why a barrier is not bottled. Okay, the Aruch HaShulchan himself says it. He says that the reason why a barrier is not bottled is not because it's choshev. It's because min haTorah, a barrier is not. It has prominence in that you get malchus for eating a barrier. Not because barrier is chashiv, because it's whole. Not that wholeness makes it have certain chashivas, an inherent chashivas, something that's whole has chashivas. Is that it's chashiv because you get malchus for it. That's a deraisa. That's a Gemara. The Rishonim say, there's not a Gemara, the Rishonim say that since it has chashivas, that you get malchus for it, also, le'inyan bittul, it won't be bottled. So it's not that it has chashivas because it's an inherently valuable thing, like a chaticha rui l'skabit. A chaticha rui l'skabit it's inherently chashiv, it can't be bottled. It's too important, it can't be bottled. It's not bottled because it's too important. It's not bottled because it has a special din associated with it, and therefore, the Rishonim say it can't be bottled. Well, the Aruch HaShulchan himself agrees. He says you would get malchus for eating a really tiny bug or a really disgusting bug. That doesn't take away from it. If it's a barrier, it's a barrier. So what's the fact that it doesn't have chashivos make a difference? It's not important that it has inherent chashivos. What's important is does it have malchus for eating that thing? And yes, it does. It does have malchus.
So you can't use the Aruch HaShulchan to ask the Aruch HaShulchan.
No, the Aruch HaShulchan. It's just I'm using his name just because to say that he agrees. Everybody says that's the reason. No, it's not that he made it up. That is the reason. It's because he had malchus.
Obviously, he knows that, and he's still saying it after. He's still being somewhere.
So he says. So he answers the question. He sort of answers on himself, and he sort of answers on himself, and he responds. He says, well, even though you get malchus for eating such a tiny thing, when Chazal said that the things you get malchus for, you can't be bottled, they wouldn't have said it for this one. when they made that rule that if you get malchus, it can't be bottled, they wouldn't have said, you get, in this case. They would have only said it in some of the cases, not other one of the cases. Okay? But that's not really being so straight as to what it said. Really, the Rishonim say, if you get malchus, therefore it can't be bottled. So he says, well, in this case, I don't think they would have agreed to that thing. Okay?
This is his own story, right? The other thing is a
sheep. Yes, no, this is his own. Well, I mean, it's from Mishnah Zechus, one part of it. He brings people who say like this. He's not making it up. But there's an inherent weakness to this argument, which is, you're saying that it's because it's lack of chashivas.
I know, it's the funny thing is saying, like, he knows what he was saying, because he brought it down, so obviously he knew what he was saying.
He's not saying he didn't know what he's saying.
I'm showing a weakness to what he's saying. That even if you want to think that through, it's a weak svara to say like that. And the last is, he says this, in his last point, not the second and third, now we're on to the third one, he said is that since bugs are disgusting, therefore we say they can't be, therefore they're not considered, has the status of berries. So to which someone said, he says, wait a second. He says, we're not talking about things like an ant or a fly that people who see it are disgusted by. He said, we're talking about the really small bugs, at least that's for our purposes, we think about ones that very fancy companies let stay in their food. They let them stay in their food. They don't care about them. So he said, people find it disgusting? No, they don't. The whole world. Okay, so that's an argument back.
Who says this? What you're saying?
What is it disgusting about, the bug or the fact that it has bugs in it?
The bug is disgusting.
So if someone would see the bug...
Okay, so you see is what the point of Shulchan is, if I would see it, I would find it disgusting. If I don't see it, it's just...
Doesn't he say good nice of Ham of Gam?
No. The fact that it's a thing that's nice to Ham of Gam shows that people find it disgusting. Therefore, Chazal wouldn't have made it considered a barrier. Barrier is like a higher status. You don't give this higher status to things that are so disgusting. You only give it to good things, not to disgusting things. Okay, so now, there's an argument back to say, well, that's it's because I didn't see it. I'm bringing up these points, and my last thing to say about these details is, the people who want to be some kind of say, well, Aruch HaShulchan, like you said, he knew what you're saying, and he thought of it anyhow. He agreed with it anyhow. So, I'm sorry. On these arguments, again, all of them have a built-in problem that the Aruch HaShulchan says that we should be samach on it. So if you want to be samach on the Aruch HaShulchan says, well, you're arguing with me on the details. The argument in the details is the Aruch HaShulchan. I mean, he even says these things. He says it himself, and he didn't like what you said. So, okay.
I understand. It's not a Gemara that a bug is a feeling of a bottle because it's
No.
No,
it's a Gemara that you get malchus for it, and I'm pretty sure we had it, and we took that in Halacha Gimel. I think it's Rishonim who say, and therefore it's not going to be bottle also. I don't believe it's a Gemara.
The Catholic it's a berry appeal of a bottle. That's not
that a berry is, but that we should say that a bug. The Gemara says that a berry. I don't believe it's a Gemara. Maybe I'm making a mistake.
Really?
I'm not sure. I don't remember. I'll put back my notes from Halacha Gimel. Okay, now so these were the people's discussions about the specific point Aruch HaShulchan said. As I said to you, that has a weakness to it because, well, Aruch HaShulchan said it. He's trying to be Limud Zechus. He's trying to be samach on the Tashiyachid. But he has to be Kashrus that it's not Halacha. He has to be Kashrus. This is not supposed to be Halacha. It's supposed to be, so to speak, not Halacha. Right, okay. So, but now we turn to 3 points of people that relate to the general idea of what he's saying. Not to the specifics of what he said, but to the general point. Okay. First is, Aruch HaShulchan is saying, lots of places can do it. Aruch HaShulchan does it very often. He's Limud Zechus on people. What does that mean? We look at a group of people. We say these are people who are basically do the right thing, and now they're doing something that seems to be not the right thing. So we say, rather than say they're doing the wrong thing, we say let's be Limud Zechus and find a way to justify what they're doing. Okay. So that means we can't ask too many questions on what he's saying because we're trying to prove something that's, if I could use it, trying to justify something that's wrong. Okay, well, according to the books, it should be wrong. We're trying to justify what's wrong. However, at the same time, it tells you that really this is not the right thing. In other words, a Limud Zechus is to say is, well, if everybody's doing it, we'll try to give some kind of justification for it, but not really what he's supposed to do. He brings himself that the people who do the right thing don't follow this practice. You know what I mean? We could only imagine that Aruch HaShulchan in his own house didn't do like that, right?
What he says by Halachos Toloim about vegetable, he's very machmir.
Of course he's very much. Of course, he brings in Halachos Toloim. In Halachos Toloim, he brings long lists of vegetables that you can and can't
He
use.
didn't even eat himself, cabbage and all
He has
this.
long lists of vegetables that you can and can't eat. That's correct. So that is to say, even if the person being Limud Zechus, that is to say, the rabbi who's being Limud Zechus is saying the Hamoin Am are doing this for this reason, and the rabbi in his house, you imagine, doesn't do that. Okay. Now, another thing is, but that within this point is that Limud Zechus means is we take people who are overall erlich, fine people. They're doing something that looks wrong. So we say, do you think people would do the wrong thing? Do you think the Rebbeinu Shalom would let them do the wrong thing? Just let the whole tzibur just go off the deep end? Can't be. There must be some kind of justification. That's all good and true if that's who you're talking to. What happens if you're talking to people who are overall lax about their shmiras and mitzvahs?
Mm-hmm.
What happens if you talk to people who are always looking for the way out? So when they do something that looks wrong, do you say to them, oh, we'll be Limud Zechus, we'll find a way to say that it's mutter? Or do you say, if they're doing this thing, it's because they're doing the wrong thing. They do all kinds of other things that are wrong also. So we say, everything they're going to do, we say, we'll be Limud Zechus on everything, just because they do 3 mitzvahs? And we say, fakir, when we talked about Safak, the Gemara says, there's some, when you talk to people like that who are being lax about shmiras and mitzvahs, you don't tell them heterim. You don't say to them, it's mutter for this reason, because you're encouraging people to take a lax attitude to their mitzvahs. Overall, everybody is careful about something. They're not being careful. He says, oh, we'll be Limud Zechus. Not just the opposite. You'll be Limud Zechus with people who are, if I can use the word, deserving of it. People who've earned it. Overall, they do everything correct. So if do we want to be Limud Zechus for somebody who's, we're not,
Can I say something?
yes.
That could be up to the rabbi of each generation to decide what their generation is able to withstand. So even though when the Gourmet talks about the Orla, they felt that generation shouldn't be able to do it. The Aruch HaShulchan was a Rav, decided, you know what, everybody's eating vegetables. I'm not going to be able to stop them from eating vegetables. So where do I draw the line?
So I'm saying, he looked at he looked at a crowd. He said, these people are all Shermei Torah mitzvahs. They're all fine Erlich people. This is one thing that they have a weakness in. This is one thing that they're not doing right. So for them, I'm Limud Zechus. So it's a judgment, but I'm saying, does that same judgment apply when you look around the room and they're not doing anything, or they're doing very little, and he says, I'll be Limud Zechus on them also. That doesn't seem to be the right. Okay. Next this is just a minor point. This is what Yossi said, that all the things that the Aruch HaShulchan says are based on a bug not being bought because it's a barrier, which implies, as we said from the Ramah, that it's a teruvis first. It's got to be a teruvis. Since it's teruvis, it would be bought, but not that it was a barrier that it can't be bought. Okay, we talked about last time that it can sign that it's not a teruvis. It can sign that the bug is there and you could see it and you could remove it. It might not be, or there are situations when it would not be considered teruvis. Okay, if you pick up a piece of celery and there's a fly sitting right down on the outside, you can just wipe it off. That's not a teruvis. Okay, so this whole thing doesn't begin.
Here's our funniest levels.
So it depends on back in the last year we talked about which situations are considered teruvis and which are not. And
does he give you even that type of situation?
No, he says the people gave a general glance at the vegetables. They didn't see anything.
Maybe
yes, maybe not. I have to say something. If on the third layer of lettuce there's a bug, if on the third layer of lettuce there's a bug, and you just didn't look at it, then that might not be considered teruvis. In other words, just picking up the head doesn't really count. You know what I mean? Let's say you have celery. You only look at the first one, but you don't look at the second one. It's hard to call that a teruvis. But the question about being a teruvis was when it's buried in a way that it's lost and you can't find it. Okay, that's the second point. And last is, the Aruch HaShulchan says,
So this is Rabbi Heinemann.
this is what we talked about last time, about there are situations when it's a shiloh whether which cases are considered teruvis or not. There are situations when what the Aruch HaShulchan is saying doesn't make sense because those situations wouldn't be a teruvis b'chlal. Let's say if on lettuce there's a bug that's just walking across the lettuce, it's not a teruvis. You just pick it up. You would see it in front of you.
But it sounds like he's saying that almost generally speaking, it applies. He has a whole long thing that, generally speaking, he claims it's considered a teruvis, which is.
The Aruch HaShulchan is talking about his situation. That he's talking about what he has. Yeah, whether we should apply to every vegetable that we have.
Yeah, not everything, but the general situation of what is infestation obviously is going to apply to. Obviously, he holds it's considered a teruvis.
I don't know if we can stretch it to everything that we have in front of us. Meaning, Could we say it on broccoli? Could you argue that the broccoli is a terumas?
What's he talking
Maybe you
about?
could. But could you, I'm saying, could you say it on lettuce? Well, if you take a lettuce where the bug is right there on top of the lettuce, now maybe say if it's really small that regular people can't find it, maybe. But if it's bigger, no, okay, I don't know. If
You're adding.
I'm questioning. I'm not. I don't know. It's not clear.
Because you're defining terumas differently than he's implying.
No.
He's implying if you
He holds our behind him.
if you think it's
If you held like, first of all, that's a question whether we should agree. It's a question whether
Because the Aruch HaShulchan says,
wait a second.
No, but the fact that it's a terumas doesn't. It's not b'diavad.
Correct.
It's a term.
We said it just when we spoke about that shita. We mentioned that the Aruch HaShulchan himself says, like what Rabbi said, that that's considered terumas. If it's hopelessly lost, he says it out. That it's that. But so I'm saying, first of all, that was a question whether you should treat that as being a terumas or not terumas. And second is there are situations when everyone will agree it's not a terumas. Not every situation qualifies as a terumas. But you have to know he's working with an assumption that it's terumas. It's not automatic. It's not every case is that. In many cases, and of course some people in a few less cases, but there are cases that are not terumas. Something that just don't qualify.
I don't think there's machlokes here, and he must.
He's taking notes on it. He does. Yeah, he does. He says that straight. Okay. Last is the Aruch HaShulchan's Kedaihu, whatever, Lismach L'B'Shas Chag. He says if not that you're going to say what I'm saying, he says people would have an indescribable Shas Chag. He goes to the Shas Chag She'i Efshel L'Tzayer. Because the people wouldn't be able to eat bread and beans. Okay? That the people would be there would be nothing for them to eat. So it would be extra tzayir. What would have been if we say they have to be makbid on this thing? So his situation of a shas chag sure sounds like what we call shas chag. When you want to say kadai who somebody listen machalov be somebody on the das yachad by a shas chag, what he's describing sure sounds like a shas chag. So we have to think about does that shas chag apply to us also? Are we facing the same shas chag?
Said that being able to eat something ever we consider a shas chag.
Right, but if you open up the CRC app or our website, you'll find out that just about every vegetable, there's a reasonably easy way to check it, a reasonable way to check it, and be able to eat it. So, is it a shas chag that I have to eat from this place? I have to be able to eat everything whenever I want, wherever I want? Or, that's not what he was describing. He wasn't describing people who want to be able to go to any restaurant and just eat anything they want to. He was describing people who are going to starve. So what I'm saying is, we have to say his shas chag, when he's saying this whole thing, it's 2 pages long, as to why it should be mutter, is based on a situation that he was facing. The people had nothing to eat. We don't have that. Baruch Hashem, we all have plenty to eat without having to worry about being samach on a shas chag. So I think it's a question on applying what he said to us. He might be 100% right in a shas chag, as he says plenty of times. The question is whether we have that same shas chag.
Right.
Yes.
So I think the people use Aruch HaShulchan to go to.
Yes, the people who are the people who are samachan to stretch it very far to do all types of things. Now they might say, I have a different shas chag. They might argue the shas chag of if people are told they can't do this and this, maybe they'll stop being Shabbat Shabbos.
Right.
Maybe they have their own ideas of what a shas chag is, why they think it's a shas chag. But to us looking at it, there isn't anybody that we know of who's starving on the level that Aruch HaShulchan was describing, who would have nothing to eat if they didn't have
beans. They didn't have anything.
And nothing to eat. We're not holding by that. You know what I mean? Look, my kids can live on crunchers. You know what I mean? Nothing's going to happen if you don't have any.
It's true.
Okay, fine. Okay, let's go on to the next thing. The next thing is the Ramah said that if you can filter out the bugs out of your food, then that's fine. Otherwise, you can't eat it. The Pri Megadim talks about a shot like this. He says, what happens if you have, in his case, it's mushrooms that are infested? And he says he wanted to do was, the people wanted to put mushrooms into their food, but not that they were going to eat the mushrooms. They wanted the mushrooms to give flavor into the food. So what they were going to do is they were going to wrap the mushrooms up in a linen cloth, and that way the mushrooms, the flavor from the mushroom would seep out into the food, but the mushroom itself would not get into the food. So the question was, are they allowed to do that or not? And the point is, if you wrap it in this cloth, then the bugs are going to stay inside. The cloth is going to be a barrier between the bugs and the food, and the bugs are going to stay inside. But of course, the tom of the bugs, I guess, would get out, but the bugs are going to stay inside. So he talks about it, and he says this, potentially you could say this is an example of ein kavanas levatel. You're not trying to get the bugs or their tam into your food. You're trying to get mushroom flavor into your food. You're not trying to get bugs into your food or bug flavor into your food. But he says he's not convinced that it's mutter. He says he says Kenzai we only matter something like this when there are other stadim l'hakol. He brings it in from later on of cases where there are other stadim l'hakol. Maybe it can't be samach on it. So he says if you see people being samach on it, you shouldn't protest. But he doesn't think you should do it.
Who's speaking?
There's a Prima Gadol on our halacha. He says you shouldn't be doing it. Okay. So we have a modern version of what he's describing. It's called a gourmet bag. Okay. A gourmet bag is if you want to make soup and you want to put into it herbs, that's like parsley. People put into their soup. So you want the flavor to come out of those herbs. But you don't want the pieces floating all around. You don't want the pieces floating all around your soup. So what you do is they have these little bags. They look like ladies' tights or tea, like a lady's stockings or like a tea bag. You put the stuff into it and you close it tightly. It closes tight. So the liquid of the soup flows right through it and it gets all the taste out of it. But when you're finished, you pull the whole thing out and throw it in the garbage. So you don't have to have pieces of parsley floating around your soup, but you could still have the taste that you want to do. So the shayla is, are you allowed to use it or not? It's the same thing as Aruch HaShulchan is describing. Okay, the same idea as Aruch HaShulchan is to have this cloth. As the Prima Gadol. The Prima Gadol is talking about whether you could have this cloth. And so the question is, are you allowed to use it? So Rabbi Eckstein said, well, the Prima Gadol says you're not allowed to do it. He said, look, the Prima Gadol says, don't do it. He's talking about exactly our case, and he says, you're not allowed to do it. He says, even though seemingly it should be okay, there aren't enough studies to make. He says, don't protest people who don't do it. Which is funny because in the case that he was talking about, he was protesting someone who said you could do it. But he was questioning someone who said you could do it. But the Prima Gadol says, but you're not supposed to do it. So why would he tell people to do it?
What are you worried because of the tam of the bug going into
It's not clear to me if his concern is the tam of the bug or the actual bugs getting through.
The tam's going to be bottled.
So the Prima Gadol says, he says it should be ein kanas lavato. What is he ein kanas lavato on? I'm not sure if he means on the bug who slips through or the tam that slips through. I'm not sure which one he meant. But he's not clear. He doesn't really explain himself. Why isn't it ein kanas lavato enough to be samachan? He says you need other stuff mahakol. He doesn't explain himself. So
what happens if you wash it first beforehand and then I didn't check it and I went ahead and I washed it in soap if I use parsley. I'm just giving you an example. Right? So I would have more stuff.
Let me finish what I'm saying. You might be right, even when
it's certainly infested.
So Rabbi Belsky said, Rabbi Belsky didn't agree with Rabbi Eckstein. And he said exactly what Yossi is about to say, that the Prima Gadol is talking about not a thing that's possibly infested, but something that's vada infested. Now, Rabbi Belsky said it for the following reason. He says if you look in Hilchos Pesach, the Prima Gadol talks about exactly the same shiloh. Exactly the same shiloh in Hilchos Pesach, and the Prima Gadol says that it's mutter, you're allowed to do it. So Rabbi Belsky says, so what's going on? How come in our case he said it's also same shiloh, mushrooms with bugs in them, and you want to put them into this linen cloth, the same thing. And she says, why would he say it's mutter? And here he says it's usher. What's going on? So he says, the difference is, now the Daki Chuvah over here talks about why this steering Prima Gadol. But Rabbi Belsky, the answer is that in our case, it's talking about where you know that there are bugs in them. And the case in Hilchos Pesach is where we don't know if there's bugs in it. It's just a thing like us. People pick up a head of parsley. Is there bugs in it? Who knows? It's a suffix. Now, and the reasons to think like that is that the Prima Gadol is going on the shach. In our case, the shach is talking about a thing that's known to be infested. Just like the Rambam is talking about a case where we know that there are bugs in there, and the Rambam talks about filtering them out. In Hilchos Pesach, one of the other cases talked about in that Prima Gadol there is a different case, which is to put anise into food. Okay, and anise is a food that's not chametz, it's not kidneys, but it's a possibility that there's wheat mixed into it, as it is still today. That there's a possibility that wheat gets mixed into the.
Can someone in Kashrus please pick up line 1?
That wheat kernels get mixed into the anise. Okay, so he talks about there whether you're allowed to do it or not. So Rabbi Belsky said, well look, the case of the anise is not valid that there's wheat in it, it's just a suffix. So that's the kind of case he's talking about was a suffix. So in a case where it's a suffix, then we have what we have, like the Prima Gadol says, we have other studim. We don't even know that there are bugs there in the first place. Then there are other studim also. So in that case, you're allowed to do it. And the only case Prima Gadol is asking in our case is the case where you know that the thing has bugs in it. Once you know that there are bugs in it, or it's muhsik, there's so many in it that it's so common that we assume that it's in there, then you're not allowed to use these bags. Okay, and the olam seems to be Simon Rabbi Belsky said that people do that if they don't want to check the herbs. That's a common case what people use. They don't want to check the herbs, and that's what they're made for. They're not made for bugs. They're made for chefs who don't want to have
flavor. They
don't want to have the pieces floating around. That's what they're made for. that most of the elements are Samachaneh. Okay.
Can I ask you a